and welcome to the BA Sports Podcast. It's week 11. We just capped off Thursday night football. The Eagles defeated the Commanders 26 to 18. Commanders got a score at the last second to make that score a little more reasonable for them. But Saquon had one hell of a night, probably the player of the night. Jalen Hurts didn't do too bad. Jaden Daniels got about 15 fantasy points. Terry McLaurin got absolutely blanketed by Quinyon Mitchell. This Eagles defense is shaping up to be one of the best in the league. Their young stars are performing at a very high level. And yeah, I think this Eagles team can give other top teams like the Detroit Lions a run for their money just solely based off this defense they're building. But I think that some of the more high-powered offenses could give them a little bit of trouble. But let's get into the Week 11 top starts, sits, sleepers, and busts. Going to be going through the quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, and then wrapping it all up with the kickers and defenses. So starting things off at the quarterback position, Bo Nix, I had him as a sit last week, and he performed at a very high level against the Kansas City Chiefs. They almost got the win in Kansas City against a tough matchup for them. I think that is more credit to their defense. I mean, their offense only put up 14 points, but their defense held the Chiefs to only 16. Which, I mean, if you can hold them to under 20 points, that's a pretty good job. But Knicks faces a pass defense who really lets all the quarterbacks score on them. It's the Falcons. They allow the seventh most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks, and five of their past six quarterbacks have at least 21 fantasy points or more. Four in a row, actually, Geno, Baker, Dak, and Derek Carr. So, I mean, it's not like you're getting Patrick Mahomes, well, who hasn't even done that great this year. You're not getting the star quarterbacks that they're allowing these two, like Jalen Hurts, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson. They're not playing these guys. They just allowed a ton of points to Derek Carr, who uh, came back last week. So I think Bo Nix is in a great spot here. He's been pretty consistent this year. I think you can feel pretty comfortable starting him as a low end QB1, especially with we have four teams on by this week. I just want to remind everyone I will post this in my weekly matchup analysis, but we do have four teams on by. It is the New York Giants, the Arizona Cardinals, the Carolina Panthers, and I feel like I'm forgetting one more. Let's see here. I'm pulling up the NFL schedule really fast. I know I'm missing one because there's four teams. Tampa Bay Buccaneers are they're the fourth team. So be cautious. Make sure you get these guys in. Another quarterback that you could stream this week that is readily available is Russell Wilson of the Pittsburgh Steelers. We saw what Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase did last week to this Ravens defense. Hopefully, Russell Wilson and George Pickens can connect in that same way. And this game looks like it could be a shootout, divisional matchup between the Steelers and the Ravens. Although I was looking at the point totals for the previous matchups between these two teams, and they always try and keep it low scoring. So that could be something to watch. Maybe the defenses do step up, but I do like Russell Wilson's spot here. The Ravens are pretty stout against the run. I think they're going to struggle to run with Najee. I think you can see Jalen Warren getting a little more work as a receiving back, although we did get news that Jalen Warren has an injury in practice, and it was kind of unexpected. I believe it was a back injury. So let me see. So yeah. So Jalen Warren was new today. He did practice limited practice in full, so he looks full go. So that's something to monitor with Jalen Warren's situation. But I guess if Najee goes and Jalen Warren doesn't, then Najee will get the receiving work, I believe. But they're pretty stout against the run. The Ravens are. So I do like Russell Wilson though. With this past game, they got Mike Williams emerging, and let's go into this Atlanta offense going to Denver. So they could struggle with the home crowd in Denver. I do not like Kirk Cousins this week. Another guy I just mentioned him, Patrick Mahomes. He has to go to Buffalo. I know he may do decent, but I'm not banking on him to have a great game. If you have better options, definitely play the better option. If Jared Goff, he's got a pretty good matchup. I know he had a dud last week. Justin Herbert's come on as someone in recent weeks who's, like I mentioned last week, they're just throwing the ball a ton. So yeah, Mahomes, I'm not a huge fan of. I would look to avoid. Caleb Williams is another one, but hey, maybe the offensive coordinator change in Chicago helps Caleb Williams out. I don't like their spot against Green Bay, having a fully healthy defense coming off of a bye, and this Bears offense has looked stagnant all over every single game. Some other streamers, some sleepers at the quarterback position. Jameis Winston might be out there. I like him as a QB2 in Superflex leagues, low end QB1 in very deep one QB leagues. Some other sleepers. Aaron Rodgers may have gotten dropped. I like his matchup against the Colts. Matthew Stafford may have gotten dropped after his dud of a performance against the Miami Dolphins. I like his matchup against New England. So those are some sleepers to think about. Let's move into the busts. And I'll talk more about Jameis Winston when I go into Cedric Tillman in that section. I really I it's a revenge game for Jameis. Like I really love that he's playing against New Orleans. I think he's going to do really well in that game. I'm excited to watch it. Jordan Love is my bust of the week. Now, it doesn't mean sit him, but I'm just saying right now, the QBs against the Bears have not fared well. I think Jaden Daniels is probably the best quarterback to go up against this Bears defense, but let's not forget that Hail Mary that he threw up and kind of got bailed out there in that spot. I'm not a fan of Jordan Love, and I think the Packers lean on the run game and feed Josh Jacobs in this one to get the win. I believe the Packers will win this game. I think Jaden Reed is the only Packer I would want to start at the receiver position. I will make sure to post my full weekly matchup analysis with all my starts, sits, sleepers, and busts on Saturday for you guys. That's going to round out the quarterback position. Let's go into the running back position. Starting off with my start of the week is Kareem Hunt. The Chiefs have the eighth most advantageous matchup for the run game for their O line versus the Bills D line per PFF's O line D line matchups. So I believe they'll lean on Kareem Hunt here. Buffalo's been pretty good against the pass, so I think they're going to try and get Kareem Hunt going. I mean, Kareem Hunt did pretty well against Denver last week, and I think he can do the same again. I think he has a good shot at getting in the end zone. No need to worry about Isaiah Pacheco this week, so you can fire up Kareem Hunt confidently in this one. Whereas I think Pacheco may try and make a return next week, so then that's where it gets a little iffy. But I like Kareem Hunt against this Bills defense, who's been very vulnerable against the run game all year long. So fire up Kareem Hunt. And let me think of some other starts at the running back position. I do also like DeAndre Swift. I think you got to fire up Chase Brown. Chase Brown is a guy who, ever since Zach Moss went down with an injury, I mean, he's been performing. Been involved in the receiving game. He's had 16 targets, I believe. He's got top 10 upside this week. Even though he's got a bad matchup, I think he's borderline top 10. I've got him in one league with Joe Mixon and Devon Achane. So having those three running backs really helps me out, especially with two flexes. But those are some starts at the running back position and some sits. My top sit actually is Travis Etienne once again. I just have no confidence in this Jacksonville offense, and I don't see them really getting going here at Detroit. Detroit's run defense has been stout all year. I've mentioned it in previous episodes. I've preached that this Detroit run defense, you want to avoid this matchup. And Mac Jones at quarterback, I don't see why Detroit would be scared of the pass game and Mac Jones. I mean, maybe he proves us wrong this week, but last week he was awful. And I don't like Etienne in this spot, even though Tank Bigsby, I believe, is banged up. You may be able to start Etienne if you have to as a flex. I know the bye weeks are getting a little crazy. There's 4 teams on bye, so you may be in a pinch, especially with all the injuries. So if you have to start Etienne as a flex, I won't be mad about it. Now let me go into some top sleepers at the running back position. Alexander Madison, if he's out there, he's got a great matchup. Zamir White, I like him as well, but it's hard to start Zamir White. So I like Zamir White more as a stash play. They have a new offensive coordinator in, I believe it's Scott Turner. And I believe he's going to try and get this run game going. I mean, it's really their only way to be successful in the pass game is to get Madison and or Zamir White going. And as we saw at the end of last year, Zamir White got going and he may have won some people their leagues solely based off his performances late in the season. So, I mean, that would be great to see. I like him as a stash because I think he could provide upside if you're hurting at running back and he turns out to get the majority of carries this week. They figured out the run game after the bye week. New offensive coordinators feeding him the ball. I like Zamir White as a stash play. Another running back I like if he's somehow out there, I know he was probably the number one waiver claim this week. It's Audric Estime. He's got a pretty good matchup against this Atlanta Falcon defense. And I mean, he had the worst matchup last week against the Kansas City Chiefs, and he took full on advantage of every carry that he had. He performed really well. Now, he didn't score a touchdown, I don't believe, but I think that this week he has the chance to command a lot of touches in that backfield. I know it's a little boom bust, but at this point, if you're hurting for a running back, you're hoping for that boom from Audric Estime. So that'd be something to watch out for. He is my top sleeper of the week. Another sleeper is Jaylen Warren. I talked about him a little bit, but if he's hurting out, it's hard to start him, especially with this Ravens. Or if he's hurting out, definitely don't start him. But especially with this Ravens defense, it's just tough to start running backs against them in general. They're very good against running backs. But I like Estime over Warren this week. I think Estime has potential to put up double-digit fantasy points if you need a flex or a pinch for an RB2. And let's move into my top bust at the running back position. It's going to be Tony Pollard of the Tennessee Titans. Minnesota's been pretty stout, and Tajay Spears came back, and Tajay Spears cut into Tony Pollard's work share quite a little bit. I believe that the Titans are going to be trailing in this matchup, and they're going to try and lean on Tajay Spears as a pass catching back, try and get the work off of Tony Pollard's shoulders. I mean, it's been tough for Tony Pollard. Like, he's just getting all the wear and tear on his body, and I think they're going to try and take a load off of him. They don't have a great matchup. Vikings are very good. Their defense presents a tough matchup for any quarterback, let alone running back, with the disguised blitz schemes that they run, and they do a lot of the cover zero, mug, blitz type coverages. You don't know. They line up like 7 players on the offensive line, and then they drop whichever ones they want, pick and choose back into coverage. So you don't know who's coming. You don't know who's coming. And they do a good job of disguising this in the double mug blitz. And it frustrates quarterbacks, frustrates running backs, offensive play callers. I think that Tony Pollard is going to have a tough week this week. Let's go into the wide receivers though now, because I think the wide receiver position is interesting this week. It's not a great week for wide receivers. I mean, we got some top guys on bye, Malik Neighbors, Mike Evans on bye, but I know Mike Evans has been hurt, but he's still on bye. He looks to be back after the bye next week. And let's go into my top starts at the wide receiver position. This is where I want to talk about the Browns and why I like Jameis Winston and why I like Cedric Tillman here. The Saints play a ton of man coverage at a top 10 rate this year, and they've allowed the second most yards per reception. And Cedric Tillman has found the most success against man coverage among Browns wide receivers. He has a 20% target rate against man coverage. And I think with the Saints being so bad in their secondary, they don't have Marshawn Lattimore. They traded him away. He hasn't really played this year. They play man coverage a lot. I think Cedric Tillman, Jerry Jeudy, even Elijah Moore. I love David Njoku as well. I think all of the Browns pass catchers are going to have a good week, which is why I love Jameis Winston in this revenge game spot against the New Orleans Saints. So I would fire up Cedric Tillman with confidence. Another guy I like is Jacoby Myers of the Las Vegas Raiders. He has been a PPR machine. He's getting fed with targets. He has 18 targets over his last 2 games, and he's gotten at least 17 PPR fantasy points in those last 2 games. Those were the Chiefs and the Bengals. I think he will have success against the Dolphins. They've allowed 5 receivers, as we saw last week. Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua had pretty decent outings. Puka Nacua especially had a really good game. I think Jacoby Myers can do that, and hopefully this new offensive coordinator can provide some confidence to this quarterback, this offense in general. Hopefully they get the run game going, which will help the pass game a lot more and help Jacoby Myers in general. So I like Jacoby Myers. Another flex play. I think you can start. I had him as a start last week. It's Juwan Jennings. Good matchup against Seattle. He's been pretty consistent when he's on the field, and there's no Ayuk. So I think you can have confidence in Jennings and Brock Purdy, who's looked substantially better over the past couple weeks than he did earlier in the year. And some wide receivers I do not want to play this week. DeAndre Hopkins, I know he had that one good game, but I think that game may be a little bit of an outlier. I sold high on him after that game for Tyrone Tracy. I think that's going to pay off for me in the future. I think DeAndre Hopkins is it's just tough to start. This Kansas City pass game is going to have trouble. I don't like their spot at Buffalo. That's why I have Mahomes as one of the guys I would not want to start either. Another wide receiver I don't like. It's just he's been inconsistent. I had him as a sleeper last week. He did not perform in a spot that I thought he very well could have. It's Jalen Waddle. He's practically been a sit all year. It's just tough to trust him. He's not scoring double-digit fantasy points. If you're in a pinch and have to start him as a flex, I mean, you can go that route, but he just hasn't looked good. I mean, he only had 8 PPR fantasy points. And like I said last week, he hasn't scored, I believe, 9 PPR, 10 PPR fantasy points since week 1. I think week 1 was his only double-digit PPR outing, which, I mean, honestly, if you want to drop Jalen Waddle for someone else out there and you can get someone better, go ahead and do it. I mean, I would take Cedric Tillman, I would take Jawan Jennings, I would take Lab McConkey, Jameson Williams. Uh, I mean, if somehow these guys are out there and you're in a super shallow league, I mean, drop Waddle and go get someone that is better. He's been very disappointing this year. But now let's go into some sleepers that may help you. It's going to be Lad McConkey of the Los Angeles Chargers. McConkey has a great matchup this week, I believe, with the Bengals. And I think, him and Quentin Johnson should do well. They're passing the ball a lot more. This game has the potential to be a shootout. And I think that Lad McConkey's in a good spot. And if it's going to be a shootout and they're going to be throwing the ball, fire him up. Another wide receiver I like is Jameson Williams. He is going to be playing, I believe, in his second straight game after the suspension. And he has the potential to be a deep threat. The Jaguars have one of the most heavy man defenses. So if they go into single high coverage, only one safety over the top, I mean, they could take deep shots at Jameson Williams, and I like him getting a little more targets this week if Sam Laporta does miss. So if Sam Laporta's out, I mean, fire up Jameson Williams because they're going to be feeding him. They're going to be feeding their running backs. The Jags defense is not great. I know they did decent against the Vikings, but they've got to go into Detroit this week, and that's going to be a lot tougher than being against Minnesota at home in Florida. That Detroit crowd is no joke. So I think Jameson Williams can do well, which is also why I like Jared Goff this week. Jameson Williams is fifth among qualifying receivers in fantasy points per route run against man coverage, and the Jags run it at one of actually the highest rate in the league, and they're among the bottom five worst man defenses. So fire up Jameson Williams. I like him a lot this week as a flex play. And let's go into some busts at the wide receiver position. Sticking in the same game, it's Brian Thomas Jr., who looks like a shell of himself without his quarterback, Trevor Lawrence. He had a great matchup last week against the Vikings. He got a good matchup against Detroit here, but it's tough to trust him when he only had 2 catches last week on 3 targets for less than 15 yards with Mac Jones. I mean, if you have to start Brian Thomas Jr., you're starting him as a flex at best. Like, it's just tough to trust him with Mac Jones at quarterback, and he's not really seeing targets come his way. Maybe he will in this Detroit game. Maybe they fix something after last week, but it's tough to trust him. So I have him as a sit. And another bust, or sorry, a bust, not a sit. So you don't have to sit him if you can't. Another bust, I have Darnell Mooney of the Atlanta Falcons. I think it's going to be Mooney in London. I'm not sure which one is going to get locked up by Pat Sertan. My bet is it's Mooney because London plays more in the slot than Mooney does. So I think London should be all right to avoid Pat Surtain Island for majority of the game. So I think it's going to be Darnell Mooney, which is why I have him as a bust for the wide receiver position this week. So be cautious about Darnell Mooney this week. If you have to start him, go right ahead. But this Denver defense is no joke, and they're playing at altitude. I don't know if that affects anything, but maybe they're more winded. I think Darnell Mooney's in a tough spot. So let's move into the tight end position. If you have any questions on start, sit, sleepers, and bust, be sure to either on Twitter at BA Sports Podcast, DM on Twitter at BA Sports Podcast, and I'll try and get back to them. I'm also going to do start and sit early Sunday morning, so I will try and answer as many questions as possible right before kickoff for you guys. But let's go into tight ends. I said I love David Njoku this week, and I do love him at New Orleans. Njoku, ever since Amari Cooper left, he's been way, way better. And I think he's got a solid floor, but his ceiling is super high because of the targets he will see. And the Saints defense have allowed 9+ PPR points to 7 tight ends this year. That's a pretty good mark for a starting tight end. So fire up David Njoku with confidence. And a tight end I don't like this week. It's tough to trust Jake Ferguson. I know Cooper Rush, you guys may want to get back on that train saying, "Oh, maybe he'll get Jake Ferguson the ball more." Well, the Texans defense are the best defense against tight ends. I know it's tough to drop Jake Ferguson, but if you need to drop him, I mean Will Disley's out there. Will Disley's out there, and he's had a solid floor. If you have a better tight end and you need a bye week replacement, I like Will Disley. I liked Dallas Goddard on Thursday Night Football. I'm not sure of his final stat line, but I'm debating dropping Jake Ferguson for Will Disley in one of my leagues. I have Kyle Pitts as my other tight end, so I would just need a bye replacement next week, and Will Disley can fill that role. Jake Ferguson does have some hit or miss matchups coming up, but this one is a miss. Number one, fewest fantasy points allowed. Avoid him at all costs. Sit him at all costs. He will struggle this week for sure. And some sleepers. Speaking of Will Dissly, he is on my top sleeper, alongside Jonnu Smith of the Miami Dolphins, who's looked way better in recent weeks. He's been seeing a lot more targets. I believe Jonnu Smith was tied with Devon Achan for second highest first read target share behind Tyreek Hill for Tua. So Tua is looking out for him. Not to mention, I don't know if you all watched the Monday Night Football game, but Jonnu Smith was making defenders miss. I believe he is one of the best in the NFL at making or forcing missed tackles. So fire up Johnny Smith this week if you need help at the tight end position. We're missing Trey McBride this week, so I know that's a big name. And we also may be without Dalton Kincaid. If we are without Dalton Kincaid, I would upgrade Dawson Knox to a viable low end tight end one this week. I just think he'll see a lot of targets with Kincaid out, and the Chiefs allow one of them. I think they're either one or two in most fantasy points allowed to tight ends. So you can be confident in firing up Dawson Knox if you need him to take the place of Dalton Kincaid if he's out with his injury. So that's going to do it for the sleepers at the tight end position. Now let's go into the bust. My bust, Evan Ingram. I don't like the Jags offense. I have ETN as a sit. I have Brian Thomas as a bust, and I have Evan Ingram as a bust. I just am not a fan of this Jacksonville offense. I don't think they're going to be able to get it going. I think this is a blowout in Detroit. I mean, we've seen it from Detroit earlier in the year. We've seen them blow teams out of the water. I believe it was the Titans a couple weeks ago. They blew them out in Detroit. It's going to be a tough game for the Jags, and I think they're going to quit. I think they're going to quit if they don't have things go their way. I think you may see the team quit, and it's not going to look good. But Evan Ingram is on my bust alert because the Lions are top two in fewest fantasy points allowed to opposing tight ends, and I'm not confident in starting Evan Ingram with Mac Jones. So let's go into some kickers and defenses that could help you out this week. Some kickers I like starting. I like as a sleeper. Pulling it up. Where is it? John Parker Romo. He's got a good matchup this week. He's the Vikings' new kicker. Some kickers I don't like this week. Blake Groupie. I think the Cleveland defense coming off of a bye could be tough. I do not like Kyra Santos. I know they changed offensive coordinators in Chicago, but it's tough to trust Santos in this spot. And some sleepers I do like. Maybe let me see here. Scrolling. Some sleepers. I do like Jake Bates. Maybe he's out there. Joshua Carty. We saw both of them in their field goal fest last week. And then I'm not a big fan of Evan McPherson this week. The Chargers do a good job of holding opposing kickers to a low amount of fantasy points. They're actually number 2 in fewest fantasy points allowed to kickers. So he may struggle, even though this may be a shootout. He may just be kicking extra points. So we will see in that game. Let's go into defenses. Some sleeper defenses. Rams and Dolphins. They played each other last week. I think they're going to be good this week. I like the Rams the most out of those two. And then some busts. The Steelers, Ravens. I would sit them because I think that game could be a shootout. And then a start at the defense position. I like the Texans this week. I think anyone playing the Cowboys right now is going to put up some pretty good fantasy point numbers, as we saw the Eagles put up a 20 bomb on them last week. And I actually had the Eagles last week, and it helped out big time in my matchup. Having them got me the win, actually. So I would fire up the Texas defense with confidence that they're out there. Definitely go try and get them. Some other defenses that could be out there: Packers, maybe the Browns. Other than that, it's kind of a tough week on the defenses. But if you can find the Rams out there, I love the Rams. I love what they're doing with their young studs up front on the D line. I think they can wreak havoc and get to the quarterback and cause some pressure and hopefully get you some sacks to get you some points. And that's going to do it for the start, sit, sleepers, and busts for week 11. We went over all the quarterbacks, the running backs, the wide receivers, tight ends, some flexes, kickers, and defenses. I'm going to post a full weekly matchup analysis, though, with all of my start, sit, sleepers, and busts for every game on Saturday. So look out for that on Twitter. This is a little shorter of an episode. I thank you guys for tuning in, and let's get the win in week 11. Have a great weekend, and we will see you next week for week 12. Be cautious of those buys out there. 4 teams on buys. So that is going to do it for this week, and I hope you guys have a great one. See you.